Today, I want to talk about the power of using grids, not as a shortcut, not as cheating, but as a learning tool. Grids help us slow down, observe more carefully, and understand what we are looking at in a very concrete way. A grid breaks an image into smaller sections. So instead of guessing the whole drawing at once, you can compare shapes, distances, and angles more clearly. It gives you reference points that help you focus on specific areas when needed, while still keeping the overall image in mind. The grid is a learning tool because it trains your observation, not memory or symbols. By breaking an image into small parts, the grid helps you focus on proportion, spacing, and relationships between shapes. It slows you down and forces accurate seeing. There are several benefits of using grids. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. The first one is more accurate proportions. The grid helps you place the shapes and features in the correct relationships to each other. The second benefit is more confidence starting a drawing, and I think this one is very important. The grid gives you a clear structure, making the first marks less intimidating. And the third benefit is clear understanding of mistakes. Mistakes become easier to identify because you can see exactly where proportions went wrong. For example, you make a drawing without a grid and then you make the same drawing with a grid, and then you can compare and see what went wrong, where and why, and then try to fix that in your next drawings. Grids are most useful when learning and accuracy matter. Let's start with learning. You can use them to learn and practice anything because it will allow you to understand better what you are seeing and what you are representing. You can use them when practicing portraits, studying anatomy, or learning to copy from a reference. That can be very famous artwork from the Renaissance, or it can be a photograph of a landscape that you took on your last trip. In these situations, the grid reduces the cognitive load so you can focus on learning. Now let's talk about accuracy. When you really want to get a drawing right, you can use a grid because it reduces the chances of getting the proportions and spacing wrong. It's also very useful to use a grid when you are scaling a drawing up or down, because a grid lets you transfer the same relationships accurately in a different size. In fact, there are many muralist artists that use grids to transfer their small drawings to huge walls. So if you're just learning and practicing, or you want to make a really accurate drawing, you can use a grid. If you're just making quick sketches and exploring, you don't need to use this tool. Now, let's jump into the demonstration to understand how all this theory applies in practice. Here's the reference that I'm going to use for this demo. It's a landscape with a few trees, and first I'm going to start with an analysis of this reference, and then I will make a very quick sketch. In this analysis, I will start by highlighting the proportions, so where things sit relative to each other. And I'm going to take as an example this big tree on the foreground. For example, the proportion between the trunk and the canopy. For example, we can see that the tree trunk starts here and it goes up until here, so it covers 2 rectangles plus a little tiny bit of this one, and the canopy covers this area here. It covers almost these 3 rectangles fully. It occupies a little bit of this one in here as well. And so by having a grid, instead of guessing the proportion of the tree trunk in relation to the canopy, we can see that, okay, the tree trunk is 2 rectangles plus a little bit, and the canopy is basically 1 rectangle, let's say. Next, we have spacing, so how far apart forms are. And in this case, I'm going to take as an example the distance between trees. I'm going to select this tree on the foreground and this tree that is a little further away, and it's with a grid it's very easy to see the distance between them because it's basically this rectangle, because the tree stops here and then it goes, the distance goes up until here. So basically it's this rectangle plus a little tiny bit of this one. And so with the grid you can understand much clearly the distance between objects. Instead of guessing that is more or less this or that, you can see clearly the distance between each element. Next, I'm going to highlight the angles, and for that I'm going to zoom in this rectangle. And when you're using grids, drawing with grids or analyzing an image with a grid, you can draw the overall picture, the overall image, and then zoom in specific areas that are more complex. So it's important to have this balance between zoom out and zoom in specific areas. So let's focus on this rectangle now to understand, for example, this line here. As you can see, it's more or less a 45-degree angle in comparison with this line of the rectangle. And it starts here. It's not exactly at the center. It's a little bit more towards the right. And then it is slightly curved and it goes up until the center of this side of the rectangle. And for example, this one goes towards the right and then it goes towards the left, and it touches the middle of the side of the rectangle. And so with the help of the grid you can understand much better the tilt of the lines, the angles, where they sit inside of a rectangle. Then last but not least, let's analyze scale. So how big one shape is compared to another. And in this case, I'm going to analyze how big this tree on the foreground is in comparison with these trees that are further away in the background. So scale is how the size of this tree changes compared to similar elements as they move into the background. And because this tree is on the foreground, it's much closer to us, the scale is much bigger, and because these trees are further away, they are smaller, so their scale is smaller. It's important that you analyze your reference first, so you study your reference, you understand the proportions of your elements, you understand the spacing between each element, you understand the angles of the lines and where they sit inside of specific rectangles, and also you understand the scale of shapes compared to other shapes. Now I'm going to make a very quick drawing so you see it in practice. When you are using a grid, it's important that the size of the grid that you are using on the sheet of paper that you are going to draw on is the same of the reference that you are using. In this case, it's exactly the same. The sheet of paper is an A5-2, exactly the same size of my reference, so the grid is also exactly the same. When you are scaling a drawing up or down, you still have to keep the proportions of your grid. Once you have practiced seeing your subject in this way, you don't need the grid as much because you have internalized those relationships. You trained your eye and your mind to look at the angles of the lines, the tilt of the lines, the proportions of the shapes in relation to each other, the proportions of your subject. And so your eyes and your hand gets trained to represent what you are seeing, not the symbols or the memories that you have of those subjects. For a long time, I believed that I had to draw everything freehand. No grids, no rulers, no help at all. And on one hand, that mindset did help me improve my observation skills. But on the other hand, when I struggled with certain proportions, I kept making the same mistakes over and over again because I was avoiding any tools. I was also avoiding to understand why I was committing those mistakes and even realizing that I was committing those mistakes. And so at some point, I set pride aside and I realized that using learning tools like grids or supporting tools like grids isn't a weakness. In fact, it is necessary to identify and correct mistakes. A drawing isn't less yours because you use the tool to learn how to make it, and you can use grids whenever you want, especially if you're learning. And you don't have to use them all the time, but you also don't have to avoid them at all costs. The key is balance, is to understand when you need and why you need those tools, learn from them, to improve your skills, and then understand when you no longer need them. That is the key. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, click the like button below. Let me know in the comments what's your opinion about grids and if this video changed your mind. If you want to keep watching more content like this, consider subscribing my channel so you don't miss the next drawing lessons. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.